It's 4 o'clock on a Monday, and you know what that means, don't you? It's time for another exciting episode of Taxi TV Live. Yeah. My big voiceover announcer thing. Anyway, I'd love to welcome... Oops. I'd love to turn off my email. I was just telling our lovely guest how something always goes wrong. Well, there you go. Anyway, I'd like to welcome Jim Thacker to today's show. And I've got to say, I have watched Jim go from not on my radar, not on a lot of people's radar maybe some years ago, to, okay, he's starting to break through, to all of a sudden he's on a lot of people's radar. And I think I said he's having a bit of a meteoric rise. I wouldn't say that it's like Vanderbilt level meteoric just yet, but he's getting there, and he's getting there fast. And so I invited Jim to be on a panel at the Road Rally called How to Get into Sync's Inner Circle, because he's doing it, he's done it. And that panel turned out to be one of my all-time favorites. Everybody on the panel was just awesome. And I just said to Jim before we went live that I could have just said, okay, guys, tell your story. I'm leaving the ballroom. I'll be back to thank you all later. It was great. So Jim reached out to me and said, you know, if you ever want to do a Taxi TV, there is a topic that I would like to cover. And I want to start with that today because nobody in the 15-year history of Taxi TV has ever addressed this specific topic, and it is having empathy. And take it away, Jim, because you can tell it better than I.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Michael, and I appreciate it. And I always love doing these. Always great to speak with you. I will say, one thing up front, when you did that panel, which was a great panel, by the way, just everybody on that panel was so good. I told everybody afterwards, I learned from them. It was like I was listening to Matt and listening to everybody there, and John, of course, and Patty and Greg, and they're just all just such great folks, number one, and so intelligent and great at what they do that I learned everything, and during that panel I learned a ton of stuff. But I will say we couldn't have done it without you, because I was just telling somebody this today, that I feel like you're in another life you would have been a moderator or a broadcaster, because you asked the perfect questions at the perfect time. And I think that was a big part of that panel for me, was you knew just when to kind of stop us from gabbing or going on long or whatever, and just ask the perfect question or the follow-ups. And that, when I do these with you, it's the same thing. You always tend to lead the conversation in such a great direction. So I appreciate that. And I'd say we couldn't do it without you either.
Thank you. Well, I know the topic really well. I know my audience well, and I know my guests really well. And you guys are not chosen lightly. I mean, when I put those panels together this year, I knew walking into that hotel that this was going to be an awesome rally, because I worked extra hard on who was going on which panel, and you guys just proved that, and I could not have been happier.
Yeah. And I see how hard you work on those things too, and it amazes me, and it's inspiring. It really is.
Thank you.
I'm amazed at how hard you work at that, and before, after, and even throughout the year, like how much you work on things, and always trying to do think about your members and think about everybody who's involved in Taxi at all times. I see it, and I really appreciate that, and it's really inspiring. So I appreciate you, and I guess that's empathy, right? I mean, in a nutshell, it's like understanding what people go through. And that's really the simplest terms that I can put it in, is when you're working with a library, say, or a supervisor or Taxi or whatever it might be, when you're working as an artist and a musician, a creator, and you're sending your music in. I think when I started, I think back, I think I had this kind of concept or conception that everybody on the other end, in the business side, it was like more, I guess the word is cold, calculating, business-like, just, like a machine almost, right? It's like you think of it as this machine or something, I guess is a good way to describe it. And it couldn't be further from the truth now that I know quite a few people on that side of it and have worked with them very closely. They are people who are working tirelessly and working their butts off. They have families, they have other things going on. that you never could imagine. And if they don't answer an email, for example, or whatever it might be, or you think maybe they didn't listen to your song, there's so many things that can happen along the way, right? You could get, I guess I would call, rejected from them. They don't accept your song, or they have something that they say about your song that isn't ready, or something like that. But you'll have to also, I think at that point, we all tend to, especially as creators, we all tend to get very protective and very defensive. And immediately, I used to do it all the time. I'd immediately go to, especially if I thought the song was great and everybody around me, my family, my friends, even fellow musicians were all like, boy, this song's amazing. And I would send it in, and I would either get one of two things: crickets, or a response that I would call a return or rejection. And and I would immediately be like, oh, they don't understand. They don't know what they're talking about.
They don't get me.
What are they talking about? The song's perfect for this, or whatever it might be. There's a million reasons, right? But I started to realize two things. One was empathy on the side of thinking about the music supervisor, or the film director, or the screener at Taxi, whatever it might be, on the other side of things that's listening to your music. I really started to think about, number one, they have some experience. So the empathy is the fact that maybe this person is trying to be constructive towards me. Maybe they have something really legitimate to say. So it's empathy to the degree that this person is a professional. Why would I be sending them my music, for one thing, if I didn't want to know what they thought? And then to turn around and kind of, dismiss that is kind of crazy in a way, right? When you do that. And I did it all the time. But it's so the empathy comes from knowing, okay, this person is a professional. Maybe they're being empathetic in a way towards me, trying to help me. And the second side of that is to think, these people, again, they are people who have lives and they're working their tails off. If, like, another example, let's say they didn't answer an email or return a call. What, you don't know what's going on. They probably have 100 emails in their inbox. We know they have 100 emails in their inbox, and they have 100 songs to listen to. And that's only one side of it. The other side of it is, I had a couple meetings in LA with a few people that I work with, and they were talking about how hard it was working with producers and editors. They have somebody to answer to. They're trying to find the perfect music from you to give to their boss and their people, who they have all those stresses and pressures, right?
And the people that they answer to don't think in musical terms. They think about, I like it and it works, or it doesn't. But they couldn't tell you why in most cases.
Right. And they may be pitching your songs. You don't even know it at that end. That happens many times. They're pitching your songs, working really hard, and they're getting no. They're getting a brick wall. They're getting rejection, and they have to satisfy their client. They have to, they have to keep their job and keep the people they work for happy. And so that's something I didn't really think about at all when I would send it in for certain things. I didn't think that, well, wait a minute, this person is also taking my music and has somebody to answer to, and has to satisfy their needs and what they're looking for. And then ultimately the scene, if you went to the rally this year, a few people talked about this, that you have to, your music can be the best song. It could be the best song ever in terms of musicality or something else. But when you put it up to picture, it doesn't fit a scene, right? So all of those things to me bleed into our parts of empathy and understanding, maybe, or awareness, maybe, is another word for all of this too, of what goes on the other end of things. When your music goes into that, what we've termed kind of the black hole, right? Your music goes into that place where, okay, my music got forwarded to Taxi, to a library, where is that music now? Or it got forwarded for a certain placement. Where is it now? And the answer, it could be anywhere. The answer is really, it could be anywhere. It could be sitting on somebody's desk. It could be in the process. It could be one of 3 songs getting ready to be picked. And the other thing too, I wasn't aware of, is that, especially with film, TV shows are kind of more on a real tight deadline. But with film, which I work with quite a bit now, it's like a film could take 2 years to get made, and it can get delayed. And like, we have strikes, right? We have things like COVID and strikes, and things get delayed massively. But a film can get delayed for budget. A film could get delayed in distribution, and all of these things. You're thinking, well, my song, I thought it was in this place, and then a year later you hear that it is. So sometimes it's a lot of patience too. But that's also, I think it all falls under the awareness, empathy kind of heading, if you will. So those are the things that I look at now that I never used to, that I think is really important, even when you're starting out. Because I think you're gonna save yourself a lot of pain and suffering if you realize that early on, and you can know that it takes so much patience and so much stick to itiveness, and the fact that your songs are going to maybe take a long time to get somewhere, because of all these reasons that are beyond your control too. So yeah, I think it does take not only empathy for those people on the other side, but empathy for yourself, right? You got to kind of give yourself a break sometimes on that things, because your music is going to get out there in the world, but you have to really just be patient with it, and be patient with other people, the people that are handling your music. So,
I
and it took me, trust me, it took me a long time to get to that point. I think on a couple of these taxi TVs, you've kind of remarked that when I talk about a rejection or a return or something, from somebody that I seem to kind of be able to brush it off or like move on quickly. And some of it
right.
comes out of that too, the awareness that, it didn't work out this time, but it will potentially next time, even for that same song. So there's a lot of that awareness that and it takes the hard road of going through all of that kind of rejection, and not being understanding where things end up or how things kind of work on the other end, I guess.
I get it and I understand it, having come from a studio background, and I've spent, I don't know, maybe even 10, 20,000 hours working in control rooms with artists. Artistic people are self-centered, and I don't mean that as a put down. I mean, by nature they have to be very involved in what they're creating, and it comes from within their heart, their soul, their mind. And so I understand that they have this very deep attachment to the art they create. And the flip side of that is the record industry has always been about, does it sound like a hit? And so many people, even though they've kind of moved over to the sync side of the industry, because there's a greater chance of success there, they're still thinking like everything needs to sound like a hit, and music gets picked because your song is better than mine or mine is better than his. And it's not that the song is necessarily better or worse, it's better or worse in the scene. So then people go, oh, well, now you're treating it like a commodity. How dare you treat my music, my art, my creative output as a commodity? But it is, but you can put the art back into the thought process by realizing that there's an artistic match, a blending of music and picture that works well together. So I would say to most musicians who are stuck in that I need a hit mindset, that they really need to think about learning. I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Mason Cooper, that said it on a panel. You're not in the music business. You're in the film business or the TV business, and music is a part of that. And
Yep.
I don't know how else to get musicians to wake up to that, or even if they're aware of it, to put 25 years of being trained or maybe even a little brainwashed into thinking, gotta have a hit, gotta write a hit, gotta perform a hit, moving their brain over to where the baseline default logic is, I need to write something that works well with picture.
Yeah. Yeah, and such a great point. I think that the main thing is that, I think if you and you have kind of have to make that choice as an artist and as a creator, as a writer. If you're not comfortable with that, there's nothing wrong with not being comfortable with that. But if you want to get into sync and get into the world of music for, as you say, music for picture, you're going to have to get over that. Not probably, you're going to have to get over that, because it is going to be somewhat of a commodity, and it has to fit a certain thing. It really is serving a purpose. And I mean, there is a difference between that and having a hit song, that, where you have millions of fans that love your music. It's a completely different thing. And neither one of those is, to me, right or wrong. They're just different things.
How did you learn how to go from being a songwriter hoping to have a hit, whatever else that you were going through or attempting or succeeding at in your career prior to sync? How did you move your brain over to the sync side where you started thinking in sync?
And I did exactly that because I was in Nashville for 5 years pitching to artists and writing music and trying to just hone my craft as a songwriter. That's what I came to Nashville for. And 5 years in, I'd gone to every publisher pitch, had a couple of small bites and successes here and there, worked with a few younger artists and things like that. Nothing major, a couple of things on hold. And it just, I realized too, for one thing in Nashville, there's so many great writers, right? And it's a hard road to get in there. It's a hard road to get inside the writers' inner circle in Nashville. And I made some headway in 5 years, but it was really difficult and didn't make enough headway. And I think I've told this before, but I had a few friends who were doing sync, and I joined Taxi at that time. And I went kind of 360 or 180, whatever that is, because I went from writing all vocal songs for artists to doing almost nothing but instrumentals for 3 years, because I met libraries through Taxi and wanted to write, instrumental music for these libraries. So I just was like basically a machine for 3 or 4 years, writing in nothing but instrumental music. And then I slowly kind of made my way back to producing vocal songs, and now I do both. But the real turn in it was probably getting my head bashed in Nashville for 5 years and saying, I love this, but is there something else I can do creatively? And it's funny because you go through, I guess, seasons or stages of your career and as a creative. And I did 3 or 4 years of nothing but instrumentals, and I got pretty burnt out. So I found myself gravitating back to vocal. But the nice thing is I do vocal songs and instrumentals now. I kind of split time, but it's mostly still for sync. And I still pitch in Nashville from time to time. It's funny because without even trying, I've met a few people here that are really high up in the industry, in the artist industry, and they're like, "Oh, play me some songs." And maybe I will, so maybe by ignoring it, I'll get back to that. But I think you can do different things.
It's like dating. If you go to the dance and you're chasing every young lady, right, assuming that's your situation, you're going to get rejected. When you right, just stand there and let nature take its course, you'll probably have better luck. So I think that your approach, your newly developed approach of just leaving it over there and letting it come to you is probably a really good idea.
And I think there's two things there, because I think part of it is being a bit, not desperate, but also when I meet people like that, I honestly don't feel like I want something from them. And I think they can sense that. Like, I just want to talk about, what are you guys doing? What cut have you had lately? And I'm interested in that whole side of things without saying, here's my song, instantly. And I think that's kind of, they like that because everybody's coming up to them constantly, with songs.
I love that you're bringing this up. And I think it's refreshing
for them to, and they also know I'm in sync, so it's a whole different world, and they're interested in what I do, because they're like, wow, what is that? I don't understand how that works. So we have kind of a common thing to talk about. It's really interesting.
Years ago, at least 15 years ago, I went to Nashville. I used to go 6 or 7 times a year, and people often said to me, "You're the most well-liked, well-connected outsider in Nashville," because you do have to work. You have to earn your place in Nashville. And even going there 6 or 7 times a year, I wasn't even close to somebody going there paying dues for 5 or 10 years. And even then, you don't know. Just by the amount of time you spend does not guarantee that you're going to get a cut or have a hit. It just gets you closer. But so many people, Jeffrey Steele, who, one of the great all-time writers, became a good friend of mine. I call him on a cell and go, "I'm in town." He saw me walking down Music Row, stopped his car, jumped out of it, ran over, gave me a big hug. "Why didn't you tell me you're going to be in town?" And somehow we got on the subject of sync, and he said, "Can't you get me one of those $75,000 placements?" And I laughed. I said, "Those are so few and far between, first of all. And second of all, it just doesn't happen because you're a great songwriter." And I went right back probably 90 days later, and I did 2 seminars, one at a hotel kind of like the Westin in the ballroom, and asked Dean Crepane to be my guest speaker, and he was amazing. And I did another one for pro writers only at 515 Studios. Those
Oh,
pro writers were absolutely clueless because they're so locked into their craft, which
hmm,
is, I'm sure you're keenly aware, Nashville songwriters are the best on the planet.
yeah,
They will change, like the accent of a syllable makes a big difference, and it does, and they know that. They keep
yeah,
digging deeper and deeper for how can I fine tune it more, but not to the point of making it sound overly fine tuned. But these
right.
guys were utterly clueless when it came to sync. They knew nothing about the chain of events that it took to get something into a film or a TV show. They didn't understand about it marrying the picture. They were totally stuck in the better my song is, the greater chance it will have mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, mind blowing.
Yeah, and I think that has changed some in Nashville now for sure. Like if you watch the movie Twisters that just came out, there's several big artists from Nashville that have songs in that film. I know Luke Combs has one. I think Lainey Wilson. I mean, huge names right now. So they're getting the whole sync thing. You know, with a huge budget hit movie like
Right.
that, they are going to that now. And they get it. So it's definitely has hit Nashville. I think most of the publishing companies here have sync, their sync division and things like that. But it is interesting because like I'll meet song pluggers or people here that's all they do is artist work, and they definitely still don't have any idea about sync, and it's a foreign world to them. So it's kind of fun to talk to them because I'm so interested in what they do and how that works. How do you get cuts with these major artists? Is it really all, it's funny, we talked about the inner circle at Taxi. Here there's kind of a myth that you have to be in the inner circle to get cuts. And there is some truth to that, but I also have 10 exceptions I can tell you where somebody just got in the right room with the right artist here in Nashville
Yeah.
who was up and coming, and they wrote a song and that happened to be their first number one. So there are ways inside the inner circle. Number one, one guy in particular I know was just an amazing writer, and they put him together with this young artist and she blew up and he had this for her first number one single, and that the rest is history. Now he has cuts all over the place. But it's interesting because that can happen in the sync world too, right? I mean, to kind of tie it back into that, I think one of the best things that you can do, and we talked about this a little bit on the panel, I believe, is collaborate with people. You know, if you meet somebody and you have a certain skill and they're already in a library, for example, why not do some songs with them and collaborate and potentially get into a library that they're in and meet people that way? Networking and collaboration is so huge, and some of that ties back into the empathy thing a little bit, because if you find the right person, you kind of listen to them. I mean, here's just an example, random example, but let's say you're a really good guitar player and you're talking to somebody at the rally or on the forums or something like that, and somebody, really key on what they're saying. If you find out they need a guitar player, you're fulfilling a need for them, and you have that value for what they're doing, and you can really kind of find your way doing that. I know too several people at Taxi who have done that. They have a certain skill
Oh,
set
absolutely.
and they know what they do well, and they don't try to do everything necessarily, but they work with people who can do other things. And that's one thing I love about Taxi and that whole community is you see these little groups and cliques forming, and those people rise together, and I see it every year. And
Yep.
I was part of one of those groups, with John Pearson and everybody. We met at the rally and came up together and wrote together. We were still both writing for Nashville at that time, and then we both kind of went into the sync world together. And John would say, "Hey, I just met this library a lot of times through Taxi. Do you want to write a couple songs with me for this library?" Absolutely. And we kind of carried each other through, and that's the way it's done. We talked about that a little bit on the panel, but that's the inner circle, is just meeting people, collaborating, and we talk about it all the time, but being easy to work with and finding your skill set and bringing that to the table and refining it. So I think
Well,
that's the real inner circle, right?
let's talk a little bit about being easy to work with, because you kind of flew right by that. You had it on the list, but I don't. But everybody thinks they're easy to work with. Everybody
Right.
thinks they're a really nice person. Nobody thinks they're a butthole,
Right.
or a jerk, or an amateur, or that they reek of desperation, which is another term. It's so
Right.
much like dating, and I have so much experience with that. I'm joking, but it is a lot like dating, because
You're right.
if
You're right.
if you go to a bar and you come across it just somebody who's cruising, with a singular purpose in mind for that night only, the other people you're talking to are going to pick up on that. So,
Yes.
how can you apply the empathy theory, or not theory, the practice of being empathetic to, let's say that you go to the road rally and you see a music supervisor on a panel or doing a solo presentation. 20 minutes later, they're in the bar grabbing a Coke and a burger at the bar. And you walk up to them and say, I do great music and I do this genre, that genre, and list off like 10 genres, because you're trying to sell yourself as nobody else does as many wonderful things as I do. And you and I both know enough now at this stage of our careers to know that that will make you come across as being amateurish, because
Right.
somebody who's more seasoned would never say that. They would lead with,
Right.
I'm really good at doing like modern singer-songwriter stuff with a lot of heart. That would get somebody's attention if they use that style a lot. So
Right.
how do you get a read on who you're talking to in order to be empathetic with them in the discussion?
Yeah, and you're saying from the point of view where you're a creator trying to talk to a music supervisor or
Yeah.
a library owner or something like that. Yeah, I think I think it comes down to self-awareness too, and the empathy side would be, especially if somebody's eating or talking to somebody else. And I found, even this year at the rally, people are overall, I would say 90% do get it. I mean, really, people would, I'd be talking to somebody, or I'd see a supervisor talking to somebody, and somebody would wait, kind of off to the side and wait. And that's a hard thing to do too, right? Because when the first couple of rallies I went to, I always would do that. And after 2 or 3 minutes, it gets kind of uncomfortable. You feel like you're hovering or like, stalking somebody. And a lot of times I would kind of either walk away or try to figure out a way to do that. And that happens all the time at taxi, right? There'll be two people talking and somebody's hovering, waiting to kind of get into the conversation. There were a few times this year that I can remember where people would just break right into the conversation. And I don't think that's ever a great idea unless there's a true pause and you have something to add, and there's ways to do that. But I think it's great. It's best just to wait your time. That goes not even just during the course of like that one meeting. I've had several people that it's been a few years where I've talked to them once, and then 2 years later at the rally, I see them again and get a chance to talk to them. So it's a huge patience. We hear all the time. I mean, you hear it all the time, like at the rally, it's definitely a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
And that's such a true statement. And I have to credit Chuck for that, because if I don't, he'll say I plagiarized him, by the way.
As in Chuck Henry?
No, Chuck Schlachter.
Oh,
Actually, I
okay.
think
That's
was
right.
the first guy. I think he's credited with coming up for it. But anyway, it's one of those things where that's so true, because you have to just be patient about it. And some of that is empathy in a way. Like if somebody is very busy, you just have to kind of wait for the time. And sometimes I found that's a benefit in a weird way, because I probably the 2 years before, when I talked to somebody, I might not have been ready. And a lot of things happened in those 2 years where I had different music, maybe better productions, better awareness of the whole sync thing 2 years later. And the time was right when I met that person again, or had a chance to speak with them and had some music to play for them, for example. That's something that you have to be. It's awareness as much as empathy in that respect. But it's also being aware in the moment, like when you're talking to somebody, if they seem a little uncomfortable, they seem like they want to back out of the conversation, let them. There's probably a million reasons, but just let them disengage.
This is
That's pretty important.
a
It can get
great
uncomfortable if you don't.
a great segue into something you and I talked about before we went live today, which is so many people, because they've been in the music industry and the record industry for so long, they think about everything in that through that lens, that context of if I just get to the right person. And the right person in their mind is the person at the top of the food chain. They perceive that person to be the music supervisor. You and I know now the music supervisor is really more analogous to a casting agent in movies, whereas it's the executive producer, the director, somebody who, TV, it's usually the EP, movies, it's usually the director. But the music supervisor is putting possibilities under their nose for music based on what the supervisor has gleaned from talking to their boss. So the music supervisor is the presenter of ideas, but not the decider, as I think George
Right.
Bush used to call it. Um,
Yep.
but yet, so many people think, well, I'm just going to do an end run right around music libraries, and I'm just going to pay one of these people that has a list for for $300 I can get a list of music supervisors, and I'm going to send out an email to those music supervisors, and sadly, most of those emails sound really unprofessional. At least the ones that
Yeah.
I've seen, they reek of desperation and amateurism. Is that a word,
Yep.
amateurism?
Yeah.
and
It's like decider.
right, exactly. Everybody knew what the hell I meant. Got it.
Yeah. And I say
Um,
decider all the time. It's so funny you say that. I always say supervisors aren't the decider, and it's true.
yeah, I do believe that it was the younger Bush that came up that called
Yeah.
somebody the
Yeah.
decider, and it stuck.
That's right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
so I personally am of the opinion that until you get to a certain stage and maybe got introduced to a supervisor when you
Yes.
were ready, it's a bad idea to approach a music supervisor directly. And virtually any music supervisor you will speak to will say, don't try and get to me. Why is it that it's a better idea to go to a library, a sync agent, or whomever, to go through a third party rather than going right to the person they perceive to be the decider who's really not?
Yeah, and that's such a great question, and there's so much information here that I'll try to be, you know, succinct about it, but also cover it. So one of the big things with music supervisors is that number one, they're so busy, like they are just all the time. They're answering to what we call the deciders, the director, the producer, the in television shows it's a writer or whoever it might be, but they are constantly doing that. So they do not have time to check with an artist to see, do you have split sheets? Do you have work for hires? Is the song, is the song clear? Is it a one stop? All these terms you've heard. They do
Let's
not
go
have
back for a second for people who are watching this that aren't taxi members that go to the rally and watch taxi TV a lot.
sure.
What does it mean for something to clear?
So to clear means all writers and people involved in the song have signed off and agree to pitch that song to TV and film. Essentially, is what I look at it as. Now there could be different situations, but for me, it means that everybody has literally. I like people to sign a document called the split sheet or a one-stop split sheet. Kind of to me, it's the same. It should say both of those on the document where everybody has agreed. Okay, all of us three are the writers on the song. We own the song. Do we own the master of the song? Make sure you own the masters, which means the recording. And everybody signs the document. Also included on the document, if I do one, I like to include everybody has the right to non-exclusively pitch that song. Important term is non-exclusively. Because if you start pitching exclusive, like to an exclusive library, let's say that where that's the only place you can pitch the song, it gets a little more involved with publishing and things like that. Non-exclusively, you can pitch yourself or pitch it through a non-exclusive library, things like that. The minute you want to do exclusive, you kind of have to have a different agreement, and everybody has to be on board with that. Both are, to me, actually valid and have a place, but I think that you have to all basically are agreeing to terms of the song. And you have to have everybody on that document that had something to do with the song. Sometimes it won't just be the writers. You have to be careful because what if a producer did the track and the writers wrote the song? Maybe one person sang it. There's a lot of moving parts there. A producer also sometimes will need to sign off because a producer might feel like he owns that track because he created it, right? So you have to be a little careful there. And essentially everybody just has to agree to whatever terms you have for that song and sign a document that says as such. When all that is done and done the proper way, somebody, on the other end will feel like, okay, that song's cleared. Everybody agreed. We have nobody that's going to come out of the woodwork, especially if, let's say, you got a Super Bowl commercial. Then people are going to say, oh, that's my track. I never signed off for that to be released. So you just have to make sure everybody's on board with all of those things. And
And
that's where I feel
up
like the song
front,
is clear.
because
Yes.
once the track is made, the producer is a great example of where this can go south because producer may in his or her mind think, I'm producing this track, therefore I have some ownership or control of it. Whereas the person who wrote the song thinks, well, I'm paying them, studio time or a production fee or whatever. And then if you mention it after the fact, when you, as the person who wrote it, and you've got the finished product and you love it, and you go, oh, by the way, I need you to sign this document, the producer could very well say, well, I don't agree with this. I think that my contribution was equal to yours, therefore I won't sign it. And now you're kind of screwed.
Right. And so that's a great point. And another part of clearance to me is, if that's the case, let's say there's a producer that did the track and you paid them for the track and it's all agreed there, you get another document called a work for hire, right? We've all, people at Taxi have heard that term. A work for hire is a document where the producer is saying, I got paid X amount for producing this track and I'm not entitled to any further amounts. Sometimes, I mean, anything's negotiable. Sometimes you can say, well, you did a great job. If it makes X amount, you get X percentage above X amount. I've seen all kinds of work for hires. You can do whatever you want with those. You can really write the terms in. It's just, the important thing is that everybody agrees to the terms and everybody signs it. The work for hire covers the situation where a producer has been paid for that track, and that's pretty much that. They're not, they've been paid hopefully the right amount and paid well, but they aren't expecting any other monies beyond that. So that's where a work for hire document comes in handy, and it covers that part of kind of clearing a song. The one-stop split sheet is mostly for writers, although sometimes I've seen where a producer will want a little bit of publishing. So you put them on you get a work for hire that says I did the track for $2,000, whatever it is, and then you can also include a producer on the split sheet for 10% publishing. Nothing wrong with that. There's so many different ways you can do this. And again, it really boils down to me, because I've seen every situation, it boils down to what does everybody agree to and what's fair. If the producer had a huge part of it, there's nothing wrong with paying them up front and giving them a little bit of the back end publishing on the song.
So this goes back to your empathy theory, walking a mile in the shoes of the person that you're pitching to, because if you want to earn the respect and have a open door policy with that person going forward, put yourself in their shoes. Would you want to get a song where you fall in love with it, you get your boss, being the EP or director, to fall in love with it, and now when it's time to actually put it in and sign off on the paperwork, oh, there's a problem. The producer has come out of the woodwork and claimed that he or she was a co-writer on it, blah, blah, blah. So how long?
One thing I will say about that, for me, that I found, it's not even, a lot of times it's not even a litigation issue at that point, or like people are going to start suing. It's a relationship breaker.
Yep.
Like they'll pull the song out and they'll be like, okay, but next time you send a song to that person, it can really hurt that relationship, because it did probably cost them money in editing and they had to pull the song out. And for one thing, they're just upset because they love that song for that scene, and now they got to go look for another song.
And they won't get hired by that director. They won't get hired by that director or EP again either, because they let one slip in that caused problems.
It's a snowball. It goes down the chain, because then if that happens with the supervisor and they lose work, guess what? They're not going to come to you for music next time. So it's such an important thing. And that does fall under empathy. You have to realize there's all these levels to what you're doing. It's not just your song. It's an incredible amount of people's whose livelihoods are depending on things. So to me, that's much more important than the litigation side, because I've been doing sync for 10 years, 15 years now, and I haven't heard of many lawsuits. A song that got placed and somebody was upset. Usually it's they pull the song and somebody's upset about that, and then a relationship's gone. And to me, that's the worst thing.
So let's talk about how you were taught the rules of the game. We have a mutual friend named Mason, whose last name I'm going to leave out of this. And I honestly don't remember if you met him through Taxi or you were on a panel with him somewhere, but is it a fair statement to say that he kind of trained you and taught you the ropes of being a professional, how to develop and nurture a relationship, once, so that you become part of that supervisor's inner circle? Tell that story. Yeah,
and he has been an incredible mentor, and I've learned so much. I've probably worked with him for the last 3 or 4 years quite a bit. And it was interesting because I did meet him at Taxi, and this ties so well into exactly what we're talking about. So I met him at Taxi. And I just loved what he had to say. I thought he did a panel. I thought everything made sense. And like in that one panel, I learned just a ton. Like I couldn't believe how much information and insight I gained out of what he said. So
Yeah.
I just thought it was really cool. I'd like to meet this guy. That's really was my only thought at that time. Working with him, of course, but it would seem like a long shot at that point. It was probably 2018, I think. He was at
Okay.
the rally, and I'm like, this guy's just great. I like what he talks about. He seems to be obviously he knew what he was talking about, and I just wanted to talk to him. So I tried to go up and talk to him at the stage, but he was mobbed, after the panel. So I didn't get a chance to catch him there. I think I caught him a little bit later, and I explained who I was, and he was really nice to me. And I said, yeah, I have some music, and can I send you some music? And he said, yeah, send me some music. Here's where you do it. And I was like, great. So I sent him like 4 or 5 songs, and I didn't hear back. And of course, the sensitive artist me said, "Oh, he hates my music," and I've been or whatever. A million things go through your head, and so it was really funny because some of this, I have a thing about the law of intention too. Maybe we'll do another Taxi TV on that someday. But still have it on my phone. I remember writing his name down as like one of the persons I wanted to meet, and then I tried to meet it there. It didn't happen. And so I kind of forgot about it. I think I didn't send him much more music. I don't think I sent him any more music. And then fast forward like 2 years later, through this weird other channel, I met him. So basically what happened is I met this director in LA who a friend knew, and we were all at dinner, and the film director said, "Well, what do you do, Jim?" And I said, "Well, I do music for TV and film and things like that." And he's like, "I have to introduce you to one of my best friends." And it was that supervisor.
You
And
mean
I
you
said,
and I aren't his only friends? He's got others?
and so I thought I was his best friend. But he said, so he's like, "You have to meet this guy. He does exactly what you're doing." And I'm like, that name kind of sounds familiar. And this was like 3 or 4 years. It was after COVID. So 2018. And then you fast forward, this is probably 21, I think. So it's 3 or 4 years later. I said, that name sounds really familiar. I looked at my phone and it was on that note. And it really kind of gave me goosebumps. And I'm like, yeah, I'd love to meet him. So we did a Zoom and we talked. And I sent him some more music, and he was like, "This is good stuff." And I think I got pretty lucky because I'm in Nashville, and he says to me, it's really funny because he literally said it this way. He said, "I have a film coming up. It's an indie film, and they need quite a bit of music, kind of a lower budget, but it's an indie film. Would you be interested in doing some music for it? They want traditional country." And in the same breath, he said, "Now, I'm going to ask you for traditional country for a film, and I'm probably never going to ask you for it again because it just doesn't, they use it, especially now. It's traditional countries come back.
It's
It's not a
really come
common.
back in sync in the last three or
It
4 years.
has. It
It
has.
was
Yeah.
dead to me
So,
before that.
yeah. And really, I was like surprised. I'm like, yeah, well, I have 2 guys in Nashville that I play with that can nail that stuff. So we got together and we wrote some stuff that sounded very traditional, very much like Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash and things like that. And these guys just nailed it. And I sent it to the supervisor, and he was blown away. He's like, "This is great." And he sent it to the director, and they loved it. And we got like 4 or 5 songs in that first. It was just kind of lucky
Wow.
that happened that way. And then, so I kind of got to you talking about leading with your strengths. My strength was my community here because, I produced the tracks and I was able to play guitar and do those things for that kind of music. But I had singers who could sing the heck out of it, and I was lucky. And we just got lucky on that film. And that started, obviously, the flip side of what we were just talking about when you make the supervisor look good because he has 5 great traditional songs and he shows the director's happy. And I think he's worked with that director twice since then. So you're
And
building their relationship along with your own.
did you
And that
know
was just,
enough at
it was
that?
just kind of like striking gold. It was luck and providence in some ways, but it was also preparedness. It's just the right place at the right time in some
Did
respect,
you
I think.
know enough at that point to make sure that the singer signed to work for hire and that sort of stuff? Or did you learn about those things from the supervisor? And that was like the beginning of your training, I guess.
So I will be perfectly honest. I didn't do a work for hire, but they were co-writers,
Oh,
but we didn't do split sheets. So I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to say now I practice what I preach. But 5 years ago, we didn't do split sheets on those songs. Luckily, they're like great friends of mine, which I don't think that matters. I think you still need to get split sheets. But
absolutely.
we never anticipated any problems, and everything went off without a hitch, of course. But in retrospect, and looking back, I should have had split sheets, and I did not, even though those are two of my closest friends in Nashville.
So that
It
makes a
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
great case for um, having your ducks in a row and your stuff together, because it could have gone south. Let's say one of
Yep.
your friends, extremely close friend, married at the time, ends up in a divorce, and it's a very litigious divorce, and now the soon-to-be ex-wife is suing for rights for that song, which
Right.
made it into a feature film.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Did you?
Yeah, you don't ever know what can happen. And the greatest marriages break up too, right? So greatest friendships could also have trouble. But I mean, and it is funny because early on with that project, the supervisor said, "Is everything clear?" And I said yes. And I think at the time I honestly didn't even know what that meant. I'm
Right.
being brutally honest about this, and that was 5 years ago. I've learned a ton since then, but I think at the time I was still relatively green to where I was like, "Oh yeah, everybody's on board and everything's cool." But that's not what he was asking. And again, in hindsight, I have split sheets for everything now that I do, but then I did not. So it was just, I'm luckily enough, those friends are still friends and we're still close. But it's, and the songs are placed and everything's fine. But if they had pulled out at the nth hour, that's where the real trouble begins. So
Let's talk about editors, the unsung heroes of music placements. Probably, well, I used to run a very large post production house in Los Angeles that we did a lot of TV commercials. And we had a half a dozen A-list editors under the roof. And oftentimes the people from the ad agency would come in and they'd go, "So what do you think for music? What should we use?" And this was before production music libraries were acceptable in the world of advertising, because for a long time they were thought of as stock music or canned music and too cheesy for these artsy fartsy commercials. But editors, especially in the world of reality TV, unscripted TV, editors
yes,
are often making the music choices. In that case, and a lot of people don't know this, that music supervisors are not sitting there going scene by scene saying, "Oh, let's try this track there." Basically, a music supervisor, the production company or network will authorize one, two, three, four libraries typically that
yes,
are all businessly acceptable to them, and say to the music supervisor working on the show, "These are the libraries you can work with." And now that
yep,
supervisor will go through those libraries and search for the types of tracks that typically get used on that type of show. And then they put them in electronic buckets, which are available to the editors while they're sitting in their edit bay. And now they come up on a scene where I'm going to use my well-worn example of Kim Kardashian trying to get the cap off of the milk container, and she just had her nails done, and she doesn't want to mess up her nails, and the milk container
yeah,
hits the floor, goes splash all over the kitchen, and Kimmy freaks out and runs
yeah,
out of the room. It's not a music supervisor who's going, "I know, let's use this piece of music." It's the editor looking at the emotion in the scene, going,
right,
"So she's astonished, she's pissed off, she's embarrassed. What kind of music can I use there?" And the editor picks from those pre approved buckets. But
yeah,
ultimately, the supervisor will watch the whole episode and give notes like, "Oh, that thing you
right,
picked for Kimmy not getting the cap on doesn't really work. I need something with more
yep.
anger and frustration in it." So, how have you, as a musician, as a creator, a producer, all those things, do you are you empathetic towards the editors? Do you tend to, when you're working on instrumentals, do you put yourself in their shoes and think, "All right, am I creating a track that I love that I think is cool for me, or am I creating one for this imaginary editor?"
Yeah, a perfect example too. And I guess again with empathy, that's so true. So that's knowing what those editors really look for and need, and that is also the library world, right? Because they work so quickly, and they're on such tight deadline that editors on those shows, especially, have to have just access. they don't have time to check if things are clear. So that's where libraries are really great, because they've cleared all the music, they do all that work. And those are the type of people that those shows work with pretty much exclusively, to my knowledge. They'll work with libraries and catalogs that have everything laid out, and the editor can grab things very quickly. You've done a couple of great panels over the last few years with Taxi, where somebody be up on stage showing how they pick music, and it's literally like, this song, nope, next song, nope. I mean, they are working so quickly, and it's such a pace. They need access to a ton of music, and it really cataloged very well. And I think the empathy on that side of things as a creator is, what do they need? And I'm sure you talk about this at length many times, but quickly, it's like, obviously many cues are 2 minutes long. They have an A and a B section, keep the same kind of tempo, the same kind of vibe. Don't go from, something like 160 to halftime for the B section. Do a different cue for that, because they don't want it to change. They want the same vibe throughout the cue. That's one thing I learned over the years that's very important. They want the same vibe, subtle changes. It can be pretty simple really, as long as it has a really cool something going on with it. I think just, this is more of a guess on my part, because I used to watch a lot of reality TV to see what they were using. They do like kind of interesting sounds and things that maybe will catch your ear, or have kind of a mysterious sound for something, or a tense sound. They do cue into that, I believe. The other big thing is edit points. I know many of your panelists and Taxi TVs have talked about that. Have edit points between the sections. And it doesn't have to be like, I don't think it necessarily has to be like at 30 seconds or anything like that, like by a timeline. But right at the end of your A section, have an edit point, which means kind of a silent space, or like, a drum beat where it stops. And then you have maybe, it can be 2 seconds, and then go into the B section rather. And, you hear this time tagging again, but it's so important. Because they can visually even see that, and they'll even look. I think at some of your panels, they've seen where they'll look at the track and be like, well, there's no edit point next song. Right. Because they can see where that silence is. So they're like, oh, great. It has a place where I can edit and dive in or get out of the track at a certain point. And that makes life so much easier. So edit points are huge, right?
Yeah, remember Laurel Ostrander said a lot of times she'll scan the waveform of the track before she hits play, looking for, does it get bigger at the end? Does it grow throughout? And does it have edit points?
Yep.
Oh my God, you didn't even listen to my masterpiece and you decided not to use it? That's right, Bucko, because I could tell just by looking at the waveform that it wasn't going to work.
Right. And the other two things, you just said is definitely like an A section, and then the A section with a little bit of a build. Or sometimes one of the tricks I used to use that I heard somewhere was do the A section melody with maybe a harmony part with it. So it sounds a little different. It adds a little different flavor. Just little subtle things like that. And then I think you even would have these in listings as like a sting ending. And a sting ending, at least to me, it means it ends and it can fade out. There can be a little reverb tail, but it's not a fade of the track, or it's not like a long drawn out thing. It hits the last note and boom, and then kind of fades out. Because you watch those scenes, and time again, at the end of the scene, they're gonna use that. I mean, they use that all the time in reality. It's the end of the scene, and she's picked up the milk and she puts the cap on, and boom, you go into the next scene. You want that sting ending, and they're gonna use that.
Yeah, she gets pissed off and runs out of the kitchen and slams the door on her way out. You need something to accent that. I called an exclamation point. It's a musical exclamation point. Boom.
Yep. And those are the tracks that in that world, you'll get used time and time again. And, if you're doing tension, trap tension, dramedy, those kind of things, it has to have a certain convention. And I think it's good to have a little bit of uniqueness, but I don't think you want to try to write this intense masterpiece, because it's going to be too much.
They don't pick composer of the year. They pick the piece of music that works best in the scene.
Right.
But people are still stuck in that mindset. I say this all the time. I want to take everybody and do like the shaken baby syndrome with them, where I'm going, stop thinking like that. Get over yourself. You're entering a new part of the same industry, but it's different. Well, actually, it's not the same industry. It's the TV industry or the film industry.
I think, I mean, it's true. And I think part of this too, and now that you say that, is, empathy is a good word, but also it's just, it is truly awareness and like thinking about the other person almost more than yourself. And that's hard to do. I mean, you talk about when you create and you're artist, you put a lot of work into that and you put your heart and soul into it. And I get it. It is kind of your baby. But at some point you have to let that, in this world, you have to let that go. And you have to realize your song is going to somebody who's going to use it for something, and it's going to accent a scene. I think that's a great thing. I think it's amazing. But if you don't put yourself in those shoes and know that that's what it's going to do, you'll cause yourself a lot of pain and suffering of holding on to that. I think Rob did a thing about preciousness, right? Holding on to precious. If you're holding on to that precious part of your song, it's pretty counterproductive to this world. It's pretty counterproductive because ultimately you're doing music that it serves the scene, it serves the emotion. And I mean, personally, I think that's awesome. I love doing that. And you said it right a minute ago, imagining what it's going to be used for. Now, you're not writing thinking about a scene, because that can get you down a whole nother path that's not necessarily great. But you're writing thinking about maybe a vibe, or like you said, what is the, is it an angry vibe? Is it a playful vibe? Is it a suspenseful vibe? And certainly in the instrumental world, I'm talking. Those things are important to think about that when you're writing, and keep that consistent in the track. Because I have heard many examples of people where they'll have a really cool A section, and then all of a sudden the B section is a completely different mood.
Oh, and in your mind you're hearing womp 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 when it doesn't go where it should have gone.
Going to be used. Yeah, it's probably not going to be used unless you get lucky and they just use the A section. But you want to be safe and make sure that vibe is the same throughout. That's another thing. So those are probably kind of the 4 or 5 things we talked about.
If you get at the end of the A section and you hear this, you should have created something cooler at the end of the A section.
That's a problem.
I wonder if I have to pay a license fee for that. Is that going to be like a $50 sync fee for that?
I know. Yeah, did somebody create that?
It actually came with my Rodecaster. I don't know. I've never bothered to check the license on that stuff to find out. But I've never seen it show up on my YouTube, dashboard that I've been dinged for that stuff.
Right.
Let's talk about one other thing that I think displays a lot of empathy, mostly for editors probably, which is titling both songs and cues. But let's go with cues for a moment because we're in editor land right now. Tell people who might be new to the game how you think about creating a title and why it's important that you create really good titles.
Yeah, and this was a huge epiphany for me because I was probably 2 years into doing all those instrumentals I talked about, and wish I knew this when I started, because that's probably 200 instrumentals that didn't have titles that I think are really important and great, and that is so true. Like when you have a title to a song for an instrumental cue, you want it to, number one, it's tricky because you want it, number one, to describe the vibe of the song for sure. But then number two, you want it to be interesting, because I have heard several editors and supervisors say the track title was so crazy or funny or great that they had to listen to that track. So if you can strike both of those and also kind of in the title impart the vibe and at the same time create this title that really is intriguing, I think that's where you're gonna really do well with instrumentals, because they will scan down and look through, and just like you were saying, she was looking for edit points. They'll see a title and be like, wow, that's exactly what I'm looking for in the vibe. So they might listen to it, and I can't think of one right now, but I really started to come up with titles that describe the song. Like I had one, I'll give you one example. So I had a surf rock song that I did, an instrumental cue, and I was kind of banging my head about what can I come up with. And it sounded really like the old school, Ventures kind of thing, but it had kind of an angry feel to me. It like had kind of this it was really edgy, and so I came up with the name Angry Ocean, which fit the vibe of being a surf song, but also fit the vibe of the song. And I thought that title worked pretty well because it really did fit the surf rock vibe.
Here's a great oh, sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here's a great. This is a true example that a friend of mine told me about. He was tasked with writing and pitching a song for a movie about coal miners or factory workers, somebody, and it showed the guys punching out on the old school time clock where you pull your card out and stick it in the time clock. And his title was That Time of the Month. And he was thinking payday, but it turns out that the music supervisor on the project was a woman, and it was right around the time of Me Too, and he got a very nasty email saying this is very sexist. But
You
I
have to
thought,
be careful.
yeah,
Yes,
this was such a
absolutely.
great example of it could be payday, but the more common use might be a cyclical
Right.
event. Let's
Yeah,
shall
yeah,
we?
and sometimes too, yeah, that's a great thought, is that you have to be really careful with your titles and think in the future maybe somehow. But also, like, I was just thinking of another one of the titles I had that was like a sports rock, kind of, again, pretty aggressive sports rock guitar song. And I think John Pearson and I did it. He played bass, I played guitar. We did it together. And we were trying to come up with a title. And we said, well, something with the UFC or fighting or something. And somehow through it all, we came up with Rage in a Cage, which I thought
Ooh,
was a cool title, right? And it fit
yeah.
UFC fighting. It really fit that. So I thought, man, if somebody's looking for this, it would fit anything that's like sports related or like gladiator kind of thing. So
Great
something
title.
that,
Yeah,
but
for an
sometimes
editor, if
like
you're
that
being
song, that song
empathetic
you
to
just
the
talked about, time
editor,
of the month, you could have called it punching the clock, and that might be okay. It's kind of
right?
more regular, but it's a title, right? It fits the whole vibe.
It was
So
the
you just have
funniest.
to be careful with titles, but be creative, I think.
I've got to say, I did an episode probably a year and a half ago about using ChatGPT for generating titles for cues. Um, Nobody in the industry I've met, although most everybody has a problem with people using any form of AI to write
Yeah.
lyrics or write a melody or produce a track or anything musical and creative. Nobody I've met has had a problem with AI for titles. So if you're not good at thinking of titles, I suggest going into ChatGPT and putting in a prompt that says something like, create titles for instrumental tracks about music about this topic. And what I got back and used in that episode of the show, probably 80% of them ranged from being very usable to, wow, that's a really good title. So
Hmm.
that's a real time saver. Let's
Yeah.
also talk about tagging for a minute. Again, going back to your central theme of being empathetic. uh, Explain what tagging is and why that makes the life of an editor or music supervisor easier.
Yeah, and great question, because I'm going through this now. I use Disco, and I'm going through this. It's a massive undertaking of getting all my songs that I have in there with really good tags and metadata, and it's an interesting process because I started out doing ones that I thought worked for the song, and then I realized, I'm not searching for these. It's made for somebody else. What would they think? So
Mm-hmm.
I literally like talked to a few supervisors. I said, "What do you search for?" And one great example is one of the supervisors said, "Well, sometimes I'll search for a song that's sunny." I never would have put sunny in the tags. And obviously that's happy. It's a song that's kind of joyful. And I don't think I would have come up with that one. So with the empathy comes in and thinking about what would they search for, not necessarily what would you search for in a tag that describes the mood. The straightforward stuff, you got to have the BPM in there because supervisors do search by BPM, especially film, because there's a certain pacing of a scene. So make
Right.
sure your BPM's in there for that. And when you're doing tags, yes, do the standard ones, do angry, do happy, do, because they might search for those, but also think outside the box and think, so what other things, or even if you know someone, ask them. I've also found that, like, I'll ask somebody who isn't a musician, like, what does that song make you feel like? And they'll tell me things that I never would have thought of. You really have to kind of go with the kitchen sink for those moods. Now, when you do themes, I'd say be a little careful because you have kind of different metadata. Moods is one thing, themes is another. Themes don't go overboard because you don't want somebody, I guess it does apply to moods too. You also don't want to over tag, right? This is another danger you can get. You want to tag as much as you possibly can, but you want to be careful because you don't want a supervisor searching for a song and you tagged
Right.
it just so they'd find it as something that's not authentic, and they play it and they're like, this song is not anything but angry. Why did they? And if it happens in it once, one thing, but if they start seeing that pattern, they're going to know you're
Right.
just throwing kitchen sink in there, and
Yeah,
that's
it's called
not a good
keyword stuffing,
not a
I
good
think.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And people have tried that, and it doesn't fly. I mean, they see through that in a minute, and it actually kind of pisses them off. They don't like that. So, so put in every tag you can think of that applies to the song for sure. And think outside the box and think, what would they search for? And if you do know certain people that you're working with, ask them, and tag it with everything you can. But obviously make sure, if you're doing it as an artist, make sure your contact info is on an MP3, for example, right? We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Because if somebody does find that song, they have to be able to reach you. So whenever you hand a song out, make sure you're at least your email. If you're not comfortable putting your phone number, fine, but put your phone number if you can, and put as much contact info as you can have on that MP3, certainly. So I'd say those are the biggest things with metadata and tagging. And then, so BPM, there's one other thing I thought of. Oh, instrumentation is important too.
Right.
You want to definitely put every single instrument that's in there, because they may be looking for a song with ukulele or something that day, and you want to make sure to cover instrumentation as well.
Um, have you noticed any pattern now that your career has really gotten solidified and is starting to take off, I guess, for lack of a better way to describe it? So many of our successful members over the years have told me that they're always surprised that their simplest, oftentimes tracks that they came up with, at least in the world of instrumentals, stuff they came up with, and it just, everything fell into place in an hour, and it's literally just like an ukulele and a shaker and a dobro. I'm just probably not a good combo, but you know what I'm saying? Very, very basic stuff that they're like, ugh, it doesn't show my chops. I'm not going to win Composer of the Year award. I'm not going to win a Grammy for this one. But yet those are the ones that get used most often. What would you say about, can you make a case for sparse tracks in simplicity and simplicity?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So two of my funnest examples are one song I did with another taxi member that I met at the rally, and we were trying to finish this. It was one of the first libraries I got in, so you're trying to impress, you really want to do well, and we were at the deadline. We were like literally a week away, and it was like they wanted us to do, I think it was a 12, 14 track collection of happy clappy songs. I call them,
Right.
with ukulele, claps, whistles, and we were down to the wire. And my co-writer was traveling, and he was supposed to finish this one song, and he's like, well, I'll try to finish it tonight in the hotel. And he just came up with this quick thing where he literally did like this pattern on his knees. It was like the drums, and he whistled into the mic and clapped, sent it to me. I put, like, I think just bass and maybe an acoustic guitar on it, and that track has been placed so many times. And it's the funniest. Like, when he sent it to me, I laughed. I'm like, this is the goofiest thing. It's so funny. But maybe that's a good reaction, because it certainly was happy, and it made me feel happy or laugh or whatever. And so many people have responded. We've had placements on that track, like really nice ones. And that was like the last track at the last nth hour that we just were like, let's go for it. Let's do it. And he came up with this it was a cool idea, obviously, but I didn't think that would be the first one. I think it was the first one on the collection we got a placement on. And
Wow.
we've seen several others since then. And the other one that always gets me, and what you alluded to, another co-writer of mine from Nashville, we did a track that sounded a lot like, it was 70s rock. It sounded quite a bit like the Doobie Brothers. It had kind of that. It was like if the Doobie Brothers took China Grove and Long Train Running and put it together, because we had kind of that Long Train Running rhythm, but a more heavy underneath. And it definitely had a 70s rock feel.
Did you give it the title Long Train to China?
No, you have to be careful with that. You can't insinuate who you're trying to emulate. But the funny thing is, I think we came up with a good title. We called it California Rock, because it did really sound like a California rock song. It was kind of yacht rock, but a little heavier. So anyway, that was our title, speaking of titles. And we got, I think at the time, it was definitely my best placement. I mean, it blew me away. It was a huge UK company that took it and ran it for a year with their product. And then they used it for like this film about cleaning up the oceans. And it was the title track. That it was insane. And the funniest thing is, the whole moral of the story is, we worked hard on these guitar parts. We really, the rhythms are really cool. And my friend did this really cool lead track, and we did like layered guitars and harmony guitars. But what they used was the drums and bass.
Yeah.
On that track. They did not use those guitar parts we spent hours doing. they used just the drums and the bass from that track, and it was that they loved that part of it. They had the alt versions that you
Yeah.
do, and they just liked that version. They used it, and and at the time I was a little bummed because I'm like, we spend all the time on the tracks, but then after the fact, I'm like, I was so grateful for the placement. I'm like, this is great. It's fantastic,
I'm
and you
going to
hear
bring
that
up
too a lot
my,
of times with vocalists where they'll remove the vocals, right?
yeah,
You'll get a placement and they remove the vocals from the song in a film because it got in the way of dialogue.
all the
So it's
time with
interesting where it's simplified sometimes is better in a lot
commercials,
of
TV commercials. I can't tell you how many times
yes.
I've run into this both when I used to be a post mixer for a lot of really big TV commercials on pretty much a daily basis for years when I lived in New York. And I've seen it now as the owner of Taxi over the years that I would say I'm going to take a guess 75 80% of the people who have run listings or have seen briefs where they're looking for songs for a TV commercial, they end up going with the instrumental track, and it's usually a stripped down version of the instrumental track. So it's ironic that the ad agency, the clients are paying big bucks for a famous song and then using like the kick drum
I
and
know.
the bass and the piano pad, and
I
that's
know.
it. It's
I know. And
recognizable, but it's not the full song.
it is. And I think, probably it's maybe obvious, but I think a lot of times they love that song and they put in there like, wow, we need dialogue. And so they take the vocal out and then they strip it back and they realize, boy, we don't need all of these layers. And at that point, they've already committed to the song. So they keep it. But it is really interesting. And a lot of times in commercials, especially, they'll use just the hook line. Like they'll
Yeah.
have instrumental, maybe a little whistling going on or humming. And then at the end, it'll be like Hertz had the famous one recently. It was "Here We Go."
Yeah.
And that's all you heard at the end of the commercial. And boy, I would have loved to have had that placement. Even if that's all they used was the last hook line. I mean, why not? And they probably had vocals to that song, potentially. I mean, I don't know the situation, but that, it's just you have to be prepared as an artist to realize all your time and effort might go into something that they don't use those parts. So but I think that does beg the question that you said at the beginning of that is, do you write simplified? And I would say majority yes, especially in instrumental music, because I can't tell you how many times even libraries have told me, oh, that guitar solo is too busy, can you make it a little more melodic and simplified?
It's just
On the top, you can't it's sometimes once in a great while, but you can't just shred Eddie Van Halen over a track and expect that it's going to get placed a lot.
telling you, my dad gave me like we didn't have a warm and fuzzy relationship. He passed away a few years ago, and we were never like, let's go out in the backyard and toss a ball around, father and dad. But my parents owned a business in a farm town in Illinois, and I would go to my parents' store. I paid into Social Security for the first time at 12 years old. And so I had a lot of exposure to running a business, which has paid off in life. But my dad dropped some real pearls of wisdom on me during the course of my life. And of course, now that he's gone, I wish I could like pick up my phone and call him and go, Dad, you know what? That thing you told me when I was 14, I use all the time. One of those things is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And now I hear other people like, I don't know, maybe Dean Krippan or Chuck Schlachter, people that we know in the taxi ecosystem will toss out these things that began with my dad telling me as a young man. But that one rings truest of all because, look, musicians work so hard to develop their craft and become proficient or amazing on an instrument. It would be hard for somebody that's as good a guitar player as you are to not want to do your best work and maybe show off a little bit, like challenge yourself, even if you're not doing it to impress other people, to go, I still got it. But that could be the thing that makes it not work in a scene. And maybe that editor is too lazy to reach out and go, can I get an alt mix without the guitar part in there? They'll just move on to the next track because they're under a time crunch. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, and it is definitely all context, like who are you working for, and you just have to, again, it's the empathy thing. Like I'd say 9 times out of 10, if you're giving a guitar track to a library, I mean, it's not that you don't play any solos, but you have to be careful about the busyness. And if you're giving alts, that's great, right? I mean, if you have alt without the solo, that helps. But I'd say from what I've heard back and feedback, 9 times out of 10, unless they're asking for you to do, we want a collection where it's shredding guitar.
Yeah.
Okay, then you do that. But if it's unspoken, I would err towards the side of being more simplified and more melodic. If you have a guitar part, I would just err to that side of things, because I've heard it time and time again that the guitar's a little too busy on top, and that instrument, I mean, is especially that way. But yeah, it's one of those things where, and that is another thing with the relationships. Once you start building a relationship and you have those relationships with somebody, you can ask them, what do you want on this track? What do you want for these tracks? At least in an email, you
Yeah.
can communicate. But you have to get to that point. And I think when you're first starting out, and especially submitting tracks, err to the side of being more simplified, especially in the instrumental world. I think that's really smart way to do it.
Something we haven't touched on either on stage at the rally or in this episode of Taxi TV is lyrics. You, having lived in Nashville and spent years learning the craft under the tutelage of the best songwriters in the world, lyrics are so important. And of course, in country music in particular, for people who haven't studied country songwriting, they might not believe that this is as real or important as it is. But furniture in the room is the phrase that gets used in Nashville. That means visual details. Was the room smoky? Was it cold? Was it antique furniture or modern? Were the lights dim or bright? All those little things that put the listener in that room. In country music, you want it. She walked into a cold, dark, empty room and could feel that something was going to go to hell in a handbasket. Now you've set the whole song up. In film and TV, you want the opposite, because as a production music library owner wants a song that they can license for that scene and that scene and that scene and another scene for years and years, not just this one thing today. So how did you make the transition from learning how to craft Nashville style, visually detailed lyrics to dumbing things down without making them feel stupid for sync?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's an interesting one, because I do hear even supervisors saying, write your best song. I think even Mason said that at the rally this year.
I always want to correct him when he says that. I know the
He
spirit from
encourages
whence it
people
comes.
to write their best song. But I think it's such a fine line, because it's weird for me, because I do write more general for sync lyrically, for sure. But I also try to make it, I mean, it obviously has to be coherent. And to me, I make the chorus still kind of more lyrical, like lyrically crafted. But it's a fine line to be able to write a chorus that says something but isn't real specific. And the verses, to me, it's a little easier, because you can be a little more vague. You can kind of talk about something, and it's just subject matter. Is it a love song? Is it a song about failing? Is it a song about whatever it might be? You have to have a subject to write around. But I think what you're saying, and is probably helpful in some ways, is don't be so specific that it pigeonholes that song into one thing, and meaning one thing. I think it's best to be a little broad about it, at least in my experience. And it's a funny thing, though, because I do have just as many times where they don't want it on the nose. They don't want the song to describe the scene. And that can happen even if the lyrics are vague. If you have a song that's, and this may be pretty specific, but if you have a song that says, flying down the highway, they're probably not going to use that when the guy turns on the car stereo. They're going to use it, even if it has the right vibe. But you can't guess that. So you do, in some ways, I get what Mason's saying, write a great song. But I think there are ways you can do it without having so much furniture, as you call it, dates, names, places, things like that. I think it's better to avoid those personally, and some people may disagree with me, but I think it's better to avoid those in general. If you write a great song and it has that, you can still pitch it. But I think if every one of your songs has that, you're going to have trouble. So you want to again diversify and have songs that can definitely be universal. it like I wrote a song recently that was in a film, and the title was Too Many Ways to Fall. I mean, that can be taken a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
So it's a title that's specific in a way, but the lyrics are pretty vague. And the whole chorus was pretty much that line. I think I had one counter line, and then it was just standing on the edge, standing on a ledge, those kind of things. Pretty general still, right? Those are my verses. I didn't get too specific about things, but it's still a specific topic. You have to pick a topic, and that song probably it's only going to be used for certain things.
Robin
But it might
Frederick
be
said it best in her book that she wrote a few years ago about writing songs for film and television. The only book ever published on that topic, by the way. And I'm always amazed that her general songwriting book outsells it like 3 to 1. But the songwriting for film and TV has some really critical stuff in there. And one of the things is going back to your example about getting in the car, somebody's going to drive down the road. You don't want a song about driving down the road because it's too on the nose. It's too obvious. It's like a cheap thrill that's sort of corny. But if you had us turn on the radio and the song is about feeling free, that
right.
song might work. And her point in the book is go for the root emotion. What is it that, don't describe the process or the things in the room. What is it that the person that you're looking at on the screen is feeling, right to their most basic emotion? Well, getting in the car, cruising down PCH, I'm feeling free. Got the wind in my hair, the ocean on my left, depending if you're going north or south. But I thought that was some of the best advice she's ever come up with.
Yeah.
Is there any stuff that you want to talk about that we haven't covered? We've got 8.5 minutes left. We could do a little Q&A, or if there's stuff that you'd like to talk about. Oh,
Yeah, Q&A is great. I think there was a few questions that I had sent, I think, to what did I
I'm looking at your sheet.
let me see.
What happens once you get to the point where you're in?
Yeah. So that's a good one. Just to give to people, anybody who's like, even if you're starting out or whatever point you're at, and people who have, who have music in libraries or getting placements, something like this, can definitely relate. But I would say, I spent so much time doing the instrumental music, then getting back into vocal and doing a lot of music for TV and film in the last couple of years. And it's interesting because you work really hard. Again, we talk about hard musicians work, and it's so true. You work really hard to get to that point, and you're like, I guess you would call it you have a level of success, and then you're like, okay, now what? And I hate to inform you, at least for me, the now what is you just have to keep working hard, and you have to every day you have to get up and almost work harder. It's almost like once you're, it's like in sports, once an athlete kind of makes it, they have to hit the gym every day and work harder. And I found that to be so true. Like I still wake up every day with there's a list here on my desk of 200 things. I mean, that I have to do and get through. And it's almost like it gets more intense. So you have to get used to that really quickly, that if you're going to really get into it, let's say, I'm talking about making a career of it.
Yeah.
It's not going to get easier. And every day you're going to have to work just as hard, if not harder, once you kind of get over that initial hump of having a little bit of success. So that's the good news and the bad news. It's a good problem to have, but I didn't realize when I got into it, I thought, okay, I'll get to a certain point and it'll get easier. It does not get easier. It's maybe harder now because you have to keep up with it. And now you have those demands and those deadlines, and you have to make those. And there's not a choice unless you want to quit and give it up. And I'll say this to a lot of people, and I met some people at the rally that I talked to a little bit about this, is that if you're looking to say, okay, I'm going to produce 20 songs this year, submit to Taxi, do some of those things, that's great. I mean, that's if you know what your goals are and what level you want to do this at, do that. It's fantastic. And it just depends. I was just a person who I wanted to turn the corner and make this a career and really dive into it. If you do that, just be ready, because it's a job. You're working it every day if you really want to do it and make it your career. And there was a time where I had a really nice day gig that I was doing when I first started in sync. And I love doing both. So I was able to work at night and do some songs and instrumental music I was doing. And I was working 6-8 hours a day, every day, in a really nice job that I had that worked well with what I was doing. And then the thing that really forced my hand was they eliminated my position at the company after I think I worked there
Ah.
9 or 10 years. And I said, what am I going to do? And am I going to try to get another job? And, I had that experience. I could have got another job in that field. I worked for a company that did construction software. They did
Okay.
software that designed buildings, and I worked for them. And I'm like, I have this experience. I could go into that, or I could just dive into this music thing that was kind of starting to see some light. And I just did that at that time. So whatever level you're at, I would say, dive into that amount of it that you can handle and that you can do. But if you're gonna really try to make that turn, like we talked about a Matt or a John Pearson or myself, just realize that it doesn't get easier. You're going to work harder when you have some level of those relationships and that success. You're going to work just as hard, if not harder, than getting there. And that was an epiphany for me. I'm like, okay, now I have to get up every day and work 8, 10, 12 hours a day doing this.
But the good news is it's better than a stock portfolio because it's cumulative. The more music you make, the more will get signed, the more will get placed, and over time, someday you're going to be 65 years old and you're going to want to retire. Most musicians never really retire, but if you just wanted to go travel the world, you'd have the income rolling in while you're on a cruise ship over, in the Mediterranean because you did the work now at 35 or whatever years old you are. So
that is the nice thing about it. Definitely.
One of the things that you mentioned, I'm looking for some reason some of your questions. I've got a document of questions here, and the page that had the stuff about Stephen Pressfield, who is an author that I love, and I've turned a lot of taxi members on to Stephen Pressfield. I had him as the keynote interview during the lockdown when we did the virtual road rally. His books are genius. Is probably most coveted book is The War of Art, but you mentioned Pressfield. Do you have your notes nearby, or can you do it from the top of your head? Because he addresses this very issue about how long it takes and you think you've arrived, but you're fooling yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I don't have it in front of me, and I won't say it verbatim, but it's basically that he was a Marine, so he comes from kind of that world, and he he's very military based. He's written a lot of military books too, but he says it's something to the effect of that get used to being miserable, like a Marine. That Marines, that's what they do. That they live kind of in miserable, and the way he says it is something like get used to being miserable, because as a creative person, you're going to not want to do it every day. You're going to have a lot of failure. You're going to have a lot of rejection. You're going to have a lot of problems in this life. It's not an easy path at all. You're signing up to be miserable, so you have to get used to it, is essentially what he's saying. And then I love at the end, he kind of makes it makes it fun in a way. He says something about, because this is war, baby, and war is hell. And it really is to be in this business, and it really goes for anything. I mean, I have friends who are in the corporate world, and it's not easy for them what they do. I think it's any undertaking that you take seriously, and that's what Pressfield says in the book. Is it's not just music, it's not being an author. You can want to go be Mother Teresa and help people and save people. It's all difficult work. But I think it's, he talks about sitting down and doing the work and get ready, because you're not always going to be happy about it. And that's just reality. To me, that's the truth of it. Now, I'd say, luckily for me, 80% of my time, I love it and it's great. But there's 25% of the time where I have to force myself to sit in the chair and just do it. And then you get moving and you feel good, the blood gets flowing. But sitting in that chair sometimes is the hardest thing.
That's the difference between an amateur and a pro, though, is the amateur.
It is.
And Pressfield talks about this a lot in his books, especially the book which he aptly titled Turning Pro, that the amateur will meet with resistance, which is that ugly force inside of all of us that causes procrastination, excuses, rationalizations, all that stuff. The pro will tough it out every day. And when those of you watching that don't know Jim, don't know me, aren't that familiar with taxi, have never been to a taxi conference, the road rally, you don't hang out on our forums, which is a great repository of incredible knowledge by your fellow members, or you don't watch taxi TV, you might look at the people who are like Jim or Matt Vanderboe or John Pearson or are successful members and go, oh, all I need to do is figure out the shortcut they took and do the same thing, and I'll be there. You'll be there for a minute, maybe, but you won't
Yeah.
stay there because the people that tough it out for the 20%, like Jim just explained, when he ain't in the mood, doesn't feel like it, it'd be
Right.
much easier to go turn on cable news or a fishing show or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It is, and I think that doesn't go just. I mean, it's interesting to me because like with the whole turning pro thing, I think set your goals too, because not everybody wants to do this full time. But what is your level of goal? Well, you can still be a professional at any level of this, but you have to. I think his point in the book too, to me, is that no matter what level you're doing at why not do it as a pro? Like consider yourself a pro. Like even if your goal is to write 2 great songs this year, take that serious and really pour yourself into that. For one thing, it's interesting. You never know where that's going to lead because those 2 great songs could do something, or they could lead to 10 next year. And I think you're building on that. And I think one thing I told somebody, I can't remember if this was on Taxi TV, but it was really an epiphany of my past that I talked about, is that for some reason, and I think this was when I first got to Nashville, maybe I opened up, with BMI, I started a publishing company, my own publishing company. And something about that act, doing that, it flipped a switch in my mind. And I was like, I have my own publishing company. I'm a publisher. Just that, it costs like $200 or something, 225. I don't know what it is. But that small act for me it meant a lot because I felt like, okay, now I kind of am a pro. But I had only written a few songs that I thought were any good, and I didn't have any place. Didn't even think about TV film at that time. But something about those small acts, like starting a publishing company. He talks about even getting business cards, simple little things.
Yeah.
It's just that mindset. I don't think it means you have to do it 15 hours a day, but just take it as a pro when you have the time to do it. You'd be surprised the results, I think, are much better and stronger, and it'd be amazing the momentum that can take on sometimes too. So I mean, I think that's what I get out of War of Art anyway, and the kind of those comments.
Everybody has to read that book. For those of you watching, if
great.
you've never read the book, The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield is an absolute must read. It will explain you to yourself or explain yourself to you. You'll go, oh, identifiable. That's me. Yep, yep, yep. And once you understand what causes these things, you'll be better prepared to win the war of art.
Yeah, just that awareness.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Quick thing about turning pro. I went to some close friends of ours. A 35-year-old daughter was getting remarried. She got married in the judge's chambers years ago, wanted to have an actual wedding. And I went to the wedding on Saturday. There was a young lady who appeared to be under 30 years old they had a very pro photography team and a very pro video team. And I walked up to the young lady who was shooting the video and I said, I used to be a studio engineer and you have that twinkle in your eyes and the fire in your eyes that I had when I used to sit behind a console. I see how much you love your work. You're looking over your shoulder when you're backing up for a shot. You're scanning the room. You're doing all this stuff that I think is enviable. And at your young age to have figured that all out. I just want to let you know that somebody out here is watching you more than the wedding at the moment. Good job, young lady. And she said, well, thank you. Turns out she's 24 years old. She's one of the top 15 wedding video shooters in the country. She gets flown to places like Abu Dhabi on private jets with people to go do like movie star weddings where they have to sign NDAs and stuff. And then I said to her, I might be interested in hiring you to videotape a taxi road rally. Do you have a card? And she said, no, let me put my information in your phone. And I heard this in my head. Because as much as that young lady was incredibly impressive, she didn't have a card. And I'm not a 25-year-old. I don't live on my phone as much as 25-year-olds do. I won't even know how to go search for her on my phone maybe 6 months from now. But if I had a business card, I would put it in my Road Rally 2025 file, and she would, have dramatically increased her probability of getting a job. So all those little things add up.
Yeah, it is. It's that preparedness, and that's so important. And I think something in that was interesting. What you said is that I think if you do your thing, whatever that is, in real earnest, And that's what I've honestly tried to do for quite a while now. I found that's when it does attract mentors and people that just want to help you, and it attracts a good thing. If you're, you'll make mistakes along the way like that, but next time you'll know I have to have cards, and if you learn from those mistakes. But I think that, if you're doing it in earnest and you really get good at what you do, people will recognize that, and especially like people who've been through it will be like, I know what it's like to be starting out, but this person has that incentive and that true, I guess, like authenticity in what they're doing.
Yeah.
People will recognize that. And the minute you try to be somebody else or fake fake, people are going to recognize that. And it's kind of the opposite. It is kind of that desperation thing you talked about earlier. You just have to really come at it from a point of authenticity and openness. And but along with that, don't be stubborn either, right? Don't say, this is me, this is all I do. That's another trap. So it's a tricky game with that, but I think when you're doing that, and you see it at the rally all the time, right? Like I see all the industry pros you have at the rally, they'll really cue in on somebody they think is in earnest, authentic, humble. Those are the people that you see always kind of get, the industry pros really are attracted to and help and do things, with. And, it's pretty cool to watch that over the years too with Taxi. And you see, I think Michael brought back somebody he had worked with, a young guy that he worked with at the end of the rally this year.
Michael Lloyd. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy got a record deal with Curb Records because he chased Michael Lloyd like through the lobby and nailed him right before he walked out the front door in a humble and authentic way, not obnoxious, and said, hi, my name is, and this is the kind of music I do. I would love for you to hear it if you'd be willing to listen. And Michael Lloyd, being the gentleman he is, and seeing the twinkle in that kid's eyes and the fire in the belly and the humility and respectfulness and authenticity, Michael Lloyd said, sure, send me your stuff. And here we are like 4 years later, and the kid is now signed to Curb Records, and the label is putting everything they got behind that kid, all because he approached him at the road rally.
I do remember that. It's so funny because that blew my mind. It realized how the passage of time kind of thing. I mean, when you're that age, you grow quickly, right? But I can remember him, the young fella. I can remember him when he was in. I can remember him when he was in Michael's panel, and I think a song was played, and Michael really liked it.
Wow!
So he heard the music, and then that's when I think that's what happened, because I remember being there, and when we brought him out, I was like, the kid was like 8 feet taller.
I know.
Kid's like tall.
Yeah, he's a young man now, not a kid.
4 years or whatever it was, but it was really, it's fun to see that, and I was really happy to see that because I remember that moment. I was in that panel when that happened, so it was really fun to see that progression, and it just shows that, again, that authenticity, being earnest. It does help. Obviously, he was a talented kid. Obviously, he had talent there, but kind of unnurtured talent, like raw talent. So, but people will cue in on that. I think that's important, and that works in every field. That works in the library field. When you send music in, a library owner is going to recognize, hey, there's something there. Or when you introduce yourself, they're going to know if you're a person they can work with, for example. So you have to really approach it that way. That is the empathy thing. Think about how the other person is going to view you. It's a different version of that, but you have to really think about how you're presenting yourself to people.
And now we've come full circle back to empathy, which was the conversation that resulted in today's episode. I see people in the chat room are saying, Michael's run over. Yeah, we're like 8 minutes over, and people are going, shh, don't tell him. I don't think he's noticed. I have noticed, and we've got a bug out. But Jim, you're a great guest, and I could not be more grateful for your friendship and more proud of you for figuring it out and getting it all right, and really grateful that you're inspiring and educating your fellow members and anybody else who watches this, and the Road Rally panel, which was just spectacular. So thank you so much for reaching out to me and suggesting this, and thank you guys for showing up today. Hope you enjoyed it and learned some stuff from it, because Jim is obviously a very authentic guy who really, he ain't getting paid for this. He's doing it out of the goodness of his heart. So thank you all. I will see you guys next week. Hang on. Do I have the show title written in my book for next week? Next week is Oops. Sorry. Hang on. Not very well prepared. Oh, next week is Robin Frederick. So
nice.
yeah, don't miss that show. And Jim, if I don't, well, actually, I'm going to see Jim tomorrow. We're doing a Zoom meeting with some of taxi members who are not unlike Jim, people who give great feedback to us as a company. We're doing a Zoom meeting tomorrow with the A&R department and 2 or 3 members and a couple of music library owners. End of the year, we're going to hash things out and see what we can do to make things even better for next year. So I will see you tomorrow, Jim. I will see you guys next week on Monday. Thank you all so much, and let's have Keith LeBrant play us out.
Thank you.